with power, and mandate is a form of power, comes responsibility. And if you're not prepared to execute things responsibly and explain yourself while doing it, you do not deserve the power.
Ray Delany is a technologist by training and entrepreneur by experience and a thinker by nature.
When I was literally the most unpopular person, Fisher & Paykel, the easiest thing in the world would have been for me to quit.
He thinks, and we talk a great deal about ownership and responsibility, both the upside of being given it, but what it means when it all goes wrong.
I wanted to get us out of it. I think it was it Churchill or Patton said, when you're going through hell, keep going. So there was one customer that was key that we lost. We got to Christmas 2007 and we lost 90 grand that month.
He also demonstrates a great deal of courage. He was faced with the decision on where to take the company after facing some dark days.
So I got him and the board together and I said, no, I've just been doing this wrong and I'm sorry that your advice has been well-intentioned, but it isn't, for whatever reason, it's not working for me. I need to figure out a way to do this myself and I need your support in doing that.
He then drops a controversial truth bomb.
And I realized that if you build a better mousetrap, the world will.
Ray Delany, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you.
Thank you.
So my researcher dug up that you began in technology in Ireland in 1980. So be honest with me. What's the secret, oldest piece of technology that you still kind of admire?
Well, thanks for dating me. That's awesome.
It's a pleasure.
I was going to take technology in the broadest concept there. And the oldest piece of technology that I still possess that I greatly admire is a high-resolution photograph taken sometime in the first 2 decades of the 20th century by my grandfather, which is on a glass negative.
I don't know what a glass negative is.
Well, you know what a negative is from film.
I don't remember that.
Back in those days, the best medium before plastic was glass. So the original negatives of high-resolution photographs were on glass.
That's an adorable answer across so many different levels. The fact that you've got a keepsake from your no doubt departed grandfather.
Before I was born.
Before you, okay, right, wow. And that it's such a, what's the right word? It's a really poignant piece of technology to refer to in the day and age that we live now, which is that everything is disposable. We capture it on our phones. I note that actually Polaroid cameras are back in vogue again, and kids are kind of running around festivals and things with them these days. But it's such a timeless kind of thing to reflect upon. Talk me through a couple of those key early moments for you that were formative before you went into the space of being a founder and an owner of a company. So key kind of career trajectory from developer into leader.
Yeah, well, I guess that sort of presupposes there was ever any kind of plan. I guess for me, it was played out differently because you were kind of expected to do really well at school and go on to university and, get good qualifications and a good job in a company that, was owned by somebody you knew. But I was shit at all of those things. So I was terrible at school. Didn't manage to barely scrape out of school into not university at that time, into this very strange subject called computer science. So people rang me and said, there's a job going over here, would you like to apply for that? And I thought, well, that sounds cool, I'll do that. At one point, my brother-in-law, who'd moved to New Zealand 3 years before me, rang up and said, do you want to come and work in New Zealand? Because there's great jobs out here and we've got one for you. And I'm like, cool, I'll do that then.
How old were you when you moved to New Zealand?
I was 1984, so I was 23.
Yeah, okay.
No, 1983, I was 24. Anyway, the thing about it was that background gave me a level of arrogance that was beyond belief. So I was able to, fake whatever I needed to fake to get to the next stage. And so I ended up in my first management role very soon after I arrived, I guess, and hindsight, it didn't seem that at the time. It seemed like a long time, but I was in a CIO level role by 1987.
Wow.
And that was where I first met Brett Hancock, as you know, the famous photograph. So that then I kind of thought, well, I know everything now, clearly, so I'll go and start doing some contract work because everyone thinks I'm brilliant and that will work really well and I make hundreds of money. And that decision coincided almost instantly with the Great Recession in 1991 following the 1987 crash. And so that was a terrible decision that I made, but it showed me two things. One is that there's a higher standard when you work for yourself than there ever is when you work for somebody else. And it kind of gave me a new level of respect for people that do take that chance and go into business and put a lot of things at risk, not least of all their own kind of stress levels. But it also told me that I was a bit shit at it, so that I needed to be better than I thought I was. And I had a boss at the time who said to me, you have to make a choice as whether or not you want to be a great technician or a leader, as he put it. And you can't do both. And I thought, damn, because I quite like both. So I made the choice anyway to take a leadership direction. And so I focused on building up those skills through program management and getting into bigger projects. I'll tell a story here because it's important. It shaped my thinking around this a lot. I was given this task to essentially deliver this project which would reinvent the whole distribution chain for Fisher & Paykel. And the boss of who was in charge, he was the chief finance officer, but he was also had total responsibility for IT, called me into his office and he gave me this very impressive pep talk, essentially, about how Fisher & Paykel had been made great by young, smart people like you taking real risks and making it work, and he'd really like you to give it a go. And I'm like, wow, this is cool. And I felt like I'd got a mandate and a lot of support and walked out of that meeting feeling, 10 feet tall. So then, of course, exactly what I predicted came to pass. And there came a time not long after that when I was basically being hunted down by everybody in Fisher & Paykel, who was the guy who's created all this chaos. And so I got back into the boss's office and he said to me, everybody's out for your blood. And I said, I told them that I told you to do it. And I've got your back on this, but I need you to fix it. So that showed me a couple of things. The integrity of that guy. His name's David Henry. I have an enormous amount of respect to him to this day. But it also, what that put was I had been given the mandate, but then I had to take the responsibility as well. Wow. And then somebody said to me, you've been banging on in the staff room a lot about how crap the health system is. This job going over in the North Shore of Civil Health, why don't you apply for it? And I said, that's a very good question. So I applied for, I think the role was IS manager or something at the hospital. It ended up being the chief information officer of one of the biggest, fastest growing DHBs in the country.
Yes.
At the time when the DHBs were being established, and that was an incredibly chaotic time.
Yeah.
And I learned in that there's a whole bunch of people working in public service that I kind of became a public servant by accident.
Hi, it's Josh. Thanks for listening to the show. When founders talk about the dream exit, they're really talking about freedom. Freedom to choose how to use their time and to decide what comes next. As a client of JB Ware in New Zealand, I know this is what sets them apart. They help entrepreneurs and leaders turn success into significance. A great exit isn't just about the commas in your bank account. It's about what those commas allow you to create. Two Commas is proudly partnered with JB Ware, helping founders by putting their wealth to work for generations.
I kept on making a reasonable income, selling my time as well. And then I got a call out of the blue from a friend who had taken a job at a company called Designer Technology. and she had been appointed general manager. And she said, this company needs some strategic guidance. They're looking for somebody to come onto the board as an independent member. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds like something might pay me some money. And it paid me a very small amount of money, just to say. So they'd hired a bunch of salespeople. They'd moved to a new premises. They'd appointed my friend as general manager. And it wasn't going very well. And so what became obvious to me was that it was a fixable problem, but it was a good organization that didn't deserve to be in the situation they were in. So I said, we've got to fix this. We've got to bring in somebody that is, a serious new capability that can transform the organization, be a great rainmaker, and so on and so on. And we sort of thought, this person will be expensive and we may not be able to find them. And so eventually, through a mechanism that I can't really remember, the conversation came around to, why don't you do it, right? And I said, okay. And then they said, but there's only one way that we're prepared to let you do it, and that's it if you have skin in the game. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up with 51% of a company that was going down the gurgler, as one of my directors so eloquently put it.
So, Ray, you made a move to New Zealand. So I'm picking up on something earlier on in the early mid-1980s, and you'd come from Ireland working in technology. I have no idea what the state of technology was like in New Zealand at that point in history. Were we running in the dark ages? Or because we have this big program of work that was going through Rob Muldoon era, we were think big, the government was borrowing heavily and taxing heavily to pay for all these infrastructure investments around the country. The stock market boom was kind of, early to mid-stage there, so there was money that was flowing around. What was the technology like? What was the application of that technology in business like in New Zealand at that point?
So I definitely don't think we were in the dark ages. I think that New Zealand, from where I was sitting anyway, was as same as everywhere else in the world. Not that I'd had massive exposure to the rest of the world at that time, but I kind of knew British Isles, Ireland and England kind of market reasonably well at that stage. I felt that New Zealand was the same, at least in the area that I worked in. My first company I worked for was Feltex, and they had some pretty sophisticated stuff at that time in the space that I had been used to working. And the organization at that time had effectively their own internal IT shop, which was a separate profit center within the business. So they actually had a separate commercial entity which ran all of the technology for the whole group, and I was part of that team. Every person there was an immigrant, mostly from the UK, which was the way it was back then. Yeah. And I don't think the technology skills have ever come off the essential skills list since. And so I'm surrounded by English and Irish and Scottish and all kinds of people from the English-speaking world. And there we all were, introducing all this cool stuff. But probably that was a bit of an outlier, because the most common invocation of technology in most businesses, of any size, was provided by a company called PowerCorp, if I remember rightly. And what they delivered was IBM System 36s. And I can't remember the name of the product that typically sat on top of that for software, but it was kind of an early stage ERP system, and pretty much everybody used it. So that was my second job after Feltex, was going to one of those organizations and coming to a completely different technology stack. But it was, I think it was consistent with the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, what happened later on that decade was the whole PC revolution. So.
Yeah. The point that you made was that you were given the benefit of ownership, of accountability of something quite early on in your career. but then you had the experience later on where that kind of came back around to bite you to a certain extent. And so how have those kind of contrasting experiences shaped the way that you deal with people that are in your teams when you kind of give them some piece of responsibility to drive forward for the business?
Well, I like to think that I give people the mandate to do whatever it is that needs to be done, and allow them the freedom to execute whatever way they see fit. There's a part of me thinking that maybe my team would not agree with that, but I think that there are some people who there's two kinds of people really in my experience. One are the people that accept that mandate and understand the responsibility that comes with it, and they're desperate not to let you down.
Yeah.
And I think there are those that really want to take the mandate but don't want to take the responsibility.
Yeah.
And I have a particular hatred for those people. And I've had far too many of them in my life. It's fair to say, at least in my reading of it, although I think, again, there's two sides to every story. But I'm fundamentally of the view that with power, and mandate is a form of power, comes responsibility. And if you're not prepared to execute things responsibly and explain yourself while doing it, you do not deserve power.
Yeah.
And so I will intervene if I see people abusing that trust, if you like.
Yeah.
And that has led me into significant conflict on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
But I've never regretted that.
Yeah. I'll add to that. I have the same philosophy that if you want to gather experience and you want to progress in life, unless you're going to work for a corporate or maybe certain parts of government might fall into this category here, then you are best to take ownership and accountability for things. Because if things go wrong, and they will at some point along the way, nobody's perfect and there's many complex things that enable a project to come together, then taking that accountability and ownership means that you will grow as a consequence of it because you'll take the learning on board. The other part of that is that if it's not your responsibility, then it can't be your fault. And so then things will happen to you, not for you. And ergo, you'll probably end up in that victimhood situation, which means there's all these things going on in my life around me and there's stuff's happening to me. I've had no accountability or ownership for that thing going on. And so therefore, you'll probably continue to make the same mistakes, but you'll also be in that nasty, horrible category of being a victim of everything that goes on and around you. Any thoughts about that kind of view?
Yeah, I agree. I think that you can't control what happens to the extent we might like, but you can always control how you respond to that. So when I was literally the most important, the most unpopular person in Fisher and Paykel, the easiest thing in the world would have been for me to quit. And I had a mortgage and so on, but I probably could have survived that. It would have been less stress. But it kind of didn't really occur to me because having got into the mess, I wanted to get us out of it. And I think it was a Churchill or Patton said, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Yes.
So that was that's what drives me anyway, is that not everything's going to be easy. Not everything is going to be fun, and it's unreasonable to expect that it will. But, I am now laughing at this stuff.
Fisher and Paykel, you can laugh about Fisher and Paykel.
Yeah, and because, it is in the past and I'm still alive and all of that.
Yeah. My father-in-law says that it'll all be all right in the end, and if it's not all right, it's not the end. It's paraphrasing of the same thing. And so the other part of that is the awareness and ability to kind of own the things that are going on around you that you've either created or that are happening for you, not to you. And the philosophy that you've outlined a second ago is a core part of the Stoic philosophy. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but we can't control many things in life, but we can control how we react or respond to things that are going on and around us. You mentioned that someone said to you early on in your career that you can either be a great technician or you can be a great manager or leader. And so do you fundamentally believe that that's correct, or can you genuinely occupy both of those spaces? That was their words, not yours. So I'm asking you what your view on that is now, being a much more experienced man.
Yeah, I think he was right at the time, but I think in our industry, in the tech industry, obviously we've seen amazing leaders emerge from technical backgrounds, and so I don't necessarily think it's a zero sum kind of thing, but I think the world is very different when those words were first spoken. So I think there's still probably some areas that are true, but the way I read it was, do pick something that you want to get really good at, and for me, I never really thought I was that great at the technical stuff. It always interested me passionately, but I never thought I was that brilliant at it.
Right.
And arguably, I'm not that brilliant a leader either. But it was the one that was where I wanted to put my effort.
Yeah. I think that as a technology company founder, and actually as a founder of most different forms of businesses these days, this is a bit of a paradox. Specialism creates capability, typically. So if you focus on something and just a deep pillar of something, then you're probably going to get quite good at that thing, and therefore you'll be able to gather some leverage around that thing and create some value for yourself and the world around that thing. So specialization is really helpful. But if you specialize to the detriment of understanding what's going on around you, and you rely upon external experts or employees or even colleagues to be able to give you the information of those information and insight into what's going on, then you might miss the beat. Such as, for example, what happened at Designer Tech with your key client in Nuruewa, and your engineer said to you, "No, this is good, everything's tickety-boo," and then it turned out that wasn't the case. So that's a bit of a paradox that we've got to, kind of work our way around to a certain extent these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right, and because of those, now everything is so much more complicated than it was, and I'm not just talking in the technology world as a case for all aspects of society. There is a need for much more specialization than I think there was before. So I'm never going to be a server engineer. I needed a competent server engineer to give me an opinion and be right about it. And it was a bit sad that he didn't quite get that right.
Yeah. 1999 was a point in time before you joined Designer Tech, and before I believe that business even carried that name. But there was New Zealand's first large technology exit, and it was of the MailMarshall product. And you mentioned the 5 founders, I think I forget the name that they gave themselves.
Famous 5.
The famous 5. Okay. I know 2 or 3 of those guys, incidentally. But that company, it's on public record, was sold for $55 million in 1999, which is today money, $120, $150 million. It was a big deal in New Zealand's history at that point because we hadn't really had a big tech exit up until that point in time. Navman happened maybe the year later. I recall that being about $70-odd million. Then we started to kind of creep up with, kind of the high double digits of millions before we started to get into the 9. And then subsequently we've had 1 or 2 over $1 billion that have happened since that point in time. And so they went through this exercise of, building and selling this incredible product, MailMarshall, and I know a bunch of other people, myself included, that got involved in investing and distributing the products around the world. I was an investor in one of those companies that went through a sale many, many years later on, actually. So it wasn't quite New Zealand's PayPal mafia, but it did have quite a big influence on the early stage of technology innovation and entrepreneurship in New Zealand. Now, the interesting thing that I'm curious about is that they then said, cool, we've done it once with this company over here. We've built this, we had a services company, we built a product that was on the side of it, and we're going to retain some of the kind of, services folk, and then we're going to rebuild that business again and then create something of value and maybe go second time around is what I'm guessing. What do you think, in your observation, you got involved as an advisor before you then bought into that business? And you mentioned that it was a good group of people, but there was some things that weren't quite working properly around the company. And I know that you're not going to throw people under the bus because that's not your style, but what were the things that they weren't doing well that they had either forgotten or that they didn't know how to do with that second version of the company?
Yeah, so the MailMarshall story is an interesting one, and you're right, I wasn't directly involved, sadly. But it was still, the reverberations of that were still echoing through the company later on. They going back a little bit further, the company was always called Designer Technology Limited. and Marshall software was rebranded Marshall software at some point. I don't know, other people would know better than me whether or not it was actually spun off as a separate subsidiary, but when they sold it, they sold the original entity and changed the names. So they created a new company that held the name Designer Technology, and they swapped the names. That turned out to be the easiest way to have a simple transition of all of the IP. And yes, I think your characterization of it is probably correct in the sense that they thought, well, we've had one great success, we can have lots more.
It's not terrible logic, right?
It's not terrible logic. And individually, that some version of that, as I understand it, did actually happen, but it didn't happen in the same way. Individuals went and did their own individual thing. So, and I don't know how it came to be that only 3 of the famous 5 were still on the board by the time I arrived. Might ask them to come on the show and see if they're prepared to talk about it. But there certainly was. I think there was a feeling that this was just a repeatable process. We could just do what we did the last time, and miraculous things will happen. When I looked at it, and I think I got at least some of the earlier famous 5 to agree to this, was that mostly what had happened was luck. So they had a great product, no question about it. It was easy to implement. It was very popular with technicians who had to implement it for that reason. It did the job. It was a Kiwi product, so they had a bit of cachet going around that. But they had 2 things. That was one of them. Was the great product. The second thing they had was the guy who was in charge of sales was extremely good at the job,
right?
And he was not the sort of person that was willing to let an opportunity go by. And I think it was around the time that I joined the DHP, so probably about 1998. You might remember the Melissa virus hit.
Oh, yes.
And so Martin, apparently, this is one of the stories that I was told regularly, Martin picked up the phone and called TVNZ and said, "Do you realize that we have the solution to this problem sitting here in South Auckland?" They ended up on the news the next night after the news broke. This is the first time that there'd been a really serious cyber incident of this nature that hit the news. So they got on the news the next night with the solution.
And I presume that none of their customers had been infected by the solution, so there was validation of the product. Sure,
was the
law.
That's right. Couldn't comment. But anyway, that was they had a stratospheric lift as a consequence of that. And not long after that, they moved into new premises down in Lambie Drive in Monaco, and Helen Clark turned up and opened their premises, and so they did some of those publicity and sales things really, really well.
Yeah,
but had Melissa not happened when it happened, that wouldn't have been. Yes, they seized the opportunity, but the opportunity was luck, nicely,
and a bit of timing as well. I'll just contribute there. Having invested in startups for a very long time and evaluating businesses and teams and ideas and all that sort of thing, I used to think that I had an unfair advantage around my background in executive search, being able to evaluate the people inside the business, because I believe for the longest time they were the most important thing, because there's people, idea, execution, funding, there's like 9 or 10 things that are really, really important. Now I'm really clear that the timing is actually the most important factor, because that's an external, huge, tectonic force that you either, can see and can capitalize on or don't. So ride that wave or don't. I was telling someone an example today, which will be clear to most people. You talked about cloud computing a second ago. If you worked for Amazon selling cloud compute services from about 2016 to 2019, 2020, just pre-COVID, you essentially could write your own check. You were smashing budgets left, right, and centre because the world had woken up to this technology, and Amazon was by far and away the leading proponent of that technology, and they were just cutting up the market left, right, and centre, and so they were doing an incredible job of it. If you flip that to being 2023, when Azure, Google, insert other name of IT provider here, started to get into that cloud compute space, and you're working for AWS, you had to work hard to get your budget on an annual basis. And so that was a real massive timing factor. So back to this timing factor about the Melissa virus.
Yeah, I think that's right. Timing is important. And I think it's also true to say that they did have some stunningly brilliant people.
Yeah.
So they had Peter Hodges, who was best mates with Sean Dick. They were both computer science geniuses, and they couldn't take that away from him. Martin was a fantastic sales guy, and so they were prepared to seize the opportunities, and the timing came, and they were lucky, and a whole bunch of other things. So they had lots of the right stuff for sure. By the time I arrived in design and tech, that wasn't the case. And they still had the people there, but they weren't involved in the business to the same extent, and the market had changed as well. So in the 90s, when everybody was going internet and getting PCs and on-premises servers and all the rest of it, there was a ton of work out there. Come 2001, 2002, and everybody felt like they'd been duped exactly by the Y2K stuff. There was less of that kind of work around, and to be fair, a lot of the stuff had kind of been built, so it was harder to get work, and there was more people doing it, and so it was kind of more competitive. So that was kind of the part of the challenge.
That period, by the way, is a fascinating period of history. I started in technology at the end of 98, start of 99, so, kind of over a decade after you'd gotten in there, but still before a lot of the wave that happened post that point in time. And so I looked through the history leading up to that point in time, and through the early to mid-90s, a company's revenue would represent X number. The percentage that they spent on technology was between 1% and 2%. Then we get to 98, 99, and it jumped up to between 10 and 12%. So the average was 11% because everyone had been convinced that there was going to be this massive boogeyman that was going to come out of the server and, shut down their entire organization, and we were going to sit living in a cave for the next kind of few years or so until we figured out what went wrong. And then, of course, technology, and I talked about dupes. There's the two schools of thought. On the one hand, did we either avert the largest man-made disaster of all time, a la Chernobyl kind of levels, man-made disaster of all time, or did we get successfully duped by the most convincing industry kind of play of all time? I kind of sit somewhere in the middle. Where do you sit on that?
I think that the what it illustrates for me more than anything else is that technologists tend to overestimate the actual influence that their ship has on the world. Right? So
true.
I think that, and in recent times at least, we've managed to convince people that there's more truth to that than there actually is.
Yes. I think that's really interesting. Unless your technology is having a massively negative influence on the world, a la social media, for example, Facebook and Zuckerberg, and no, we're good. We're a force for good. We are not a force for bad at all. So if we try and convince the world it's having a massive influence, it probably isn't. But if we can try and convince the world that it's not having a massive influence, then it probably is.
Yeah, and I think that the way I look at it is technology is inert. It is what people do with it that is the key. And of course, there are negative outcomes that we can see everywhere, the use of technology. But you mentioned the Stoics earlier on. It's I think it was Socrates that said that writing is going to be a really bad idea, because how will people remember? People's memories will get really bad if they can just write things down and not have to remember them. So every technology that's ever been introduced has had both the yin and the yang. It's had the benefits, and it's had the negative side. And being human, we tend to be drawn to the negative. And in the same way, we're drawn to the catastrophic. Although, ironically, if you look at recent history in the last couple of weeks, there are certain things that we should be a little bit more drawn to than we actually are. So sometimes we focus on the wrong things. We get obsessed by a particular risk, and we get hit in the back of the head by the actual risk that we weren't paying attention to.
The law of unintended consequences is what the thing's referred to as.
Exactly.
So let's go back to those early motions at Designer Tech. So you were brought on board, on the board, you were convinced that you should buy 51% of the company, which is an interesting number in and of itself, because, technically that gives you a controlling interest, but what the Companies Office will tell us is you need to actually have 75% or more to have controlling interest of the company. And then, of course, it's down to the shareholders agreement and the Articles of Association, etc., about how the company's governed, about the ability to control, guide, and run that business as you see fit. Do you recall why that number was the number that you landed on, 51%?
The view was that 51% would give me a voting majority, which is all that was required.
Right.
I guess I'm slightly uncomfortable kind of selling stories through hearsay, so you really should have the guys in and get the whole story. But there is a tendency, I think, in human nature when there's a lot of money involved, people can find ways to be very, very difficult about signing off on things to make that money come. So they'd had some experiences in that direction, and so they were keen to make sure that I was not impeded by anything like that. Well, would that have been a defensible position if it came down to a legal shooting match? Probably not.
Right. Yeah.
It never came to that, so it wasn't really an issue.
Yeah.
And I do think also that be careful what I say here, but technical guys don't necessarily make good negotiators, and tend to be a bit hard-edged in how they approach things. So that might have been a factor. Don't know.
Yeah. I wonder if they could approach it from a win-lose perspective as opposed to a, ideally win-win, which is a little bit cliched and hard to achieve in reality, but at least you have the notion of that being something which is, what you're working towards.
Yeah. Like I say, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know the details.
Yeah.
People told me after.
Yeah. So the business wasn't achieving what it could achieve. What were some of the early things that you did to get it onto the track that it ultimately you believed should be on?
So I found I was in a position of day by day finding out just how much I didn't know about stuff that I thought I did know about. So I spent probably the first 6 months panicking about not really being too sure about what I was doing or what I'd got myself into. And so I leaned quite heavily, I think, on the board at the time for advice. And and I love these guys. They were very supportive of me, and we got there in the end. But at the time, their advice amounted, well, just do what we did and you'll be fine. I'm like, what even was that now? So for most of the period between when I actually signed up, which I think was about July 2007, to the following, about the same time the following year, I was kind of floundering, to be fair. And there was a huge market for talent, as you would remember at the time, and so the good people were exiting in droves. They had lost confidence in the business in general, and probably me in particular, I don't know. There was some that stayed, of course, so it wasn't a terrible story, and it was a bit the same with some customers. So there was one customer that was key that we lost. That was the height of the worst bit, if you like. Right, that all happened in the first 6 months. We got to Christmas 2007, and we lost 90 grand that month. Which I remember going home and telling my wife at the time this, and seeing the look on her face. And so that was the low point. That was this first 6 months was the low point. And then we continued on into the new year, and I think we probably inched upwards, just doing the mahi as best we could.
Yeah.
What
would now, Ray, with the additional nearly 20 years of experience that you have under your belt, say to that Ray? So that Ray that was floundering in the role in the business, and the company starting to, they had a little bit of cash bleed, but now they're bleeding cash. What would you go back and say to then, Ray?
What the hell have you done, man? Don't do it. You're insane. Yeah, I mean, I always struggle with those a little bit. I think you've got this is probably what I would like to say to that person. Whether or not I believe that to be the case, that's what you need to hear. And that's actually kind of how it played out, funnily enough, because a number of things happened in 2008, you might remember.
Well, the GFC started.
The least of which was the GFC. So having bought a company that was already going down the gurgler, I was then confronted with the global financial crisis. At the same time, my wife told me that she wasn't going to continue, and she walked away. And the month after that, my mother died. So
that's what we call a clusterfuck.
Well, those two things happened in about August of 2008. I flew to Ireland in September. My mother died in September. I flew to Ireland in September for her funeral, and I was on the plane when Lehman Brothers collapsed.
I was in London on the tube and the metro on the way back to the Heathrow, having had my first overseas trip. I started my first business 4 years prior, and I'm reading this going, oh shit, this is going to be serious.
Well, I was like, what does this even mean? But so yeah, that was interesting. And so I arrived back in the country towards the end of September with not a lot of hope in the future, I have to say. And it was kind of interesting because two things happened. When I landed, I got a text from Lee Roberts, who was a strong stalwart for me for many years in design tech and deserves a great shout out. He was also a great stalwart for me at Fisher & Paykel, where we first met. And he was kind of in charge of everything operational in design tech while I was there. And he texted me and said, welcome home. And that was a small encouragement that I kind of needed at that moment. And the next thing that happened was the following morning when I got a phone call from Elaine, who's now my wife, saying same thing, welcome back. And it's amazing how those small things can carry you forward to the next bit. So I ended up, we ended up actually ironically making a small profit that month. I still remember getting a massive big smiley face from the chair, Sean, at the time, because it was the first time that it happened on my watch. And so that was, was kind of, it didn't persist quite as we would have liked to, but it was some form of progress. And I got a bit, sorry, I got a bit lost.
No, that's okay. I'm going to pick up on surviving a crisis here, because I think that last year especially, 5,500 liquidations in New Zealand. The year before was 2,500. It's the highest it's ever been nationally. So you can say that, we've probably experienced the worst and deepest recession that New Zealand has ever gone through. And, a lot of entrepreneurs, and so a lot of people are going through really, really difficult times. And so, like a crisis survival pack, I'm hearing, 3 things here that you mentioned, which is really interesting. One foot in front of the other. So just focus on the thing that's directly in front of you. Don't worry about the big, catastrophic existential thing that's out there. I'd encourage you to think of anything that I might be missing here, and I'm kind of relaying your words here to a certain extent. Look for people that are going to give you positive reinforcement and will make you feel good about whatever it is that you can feel good about in that particular moment, and focus on what you can control, and then do your best and hope that the things that are outside of that are going to kind of work out in the right way. It's like a nice little crisis survival pack to me. Is there anything else?
Sounds really good when you put it together.
Yeah, cool. Okay, great. Yeah.
We should brand it and sell it.
Let's do it, Ray. We'll stop the podcast now and we'll launch a side digital app or something. So you then entered 2009. We won't go through the nitty-gritty of recovering from a recession, because we all know that probably would have been hard work and refactoring the team and, rebuilding products and all that sort of stuff. But it was 10 years between that date and the ultimate selling of the company. Key emotions that happened over that 10-year period, key wins, key things that you did to enable the business to get to where it was ultimately attractive for someone else to buy.
So probably the first thing that was the key was I took control in a way that I hadn't previously. So as I said before, I leaned a lot on the original founders and the directors for advice in the first year or so. I went away to Rarotonga for over Christmas and spent a lot of time detoxing and thinking. And I realized that I needed to do some significant restructuring of the business. And one of the roles that had to go was a full-time position that would be quite influential and quite supportive. And I was really not looking forward to having the conversation. And that person, first, when I got back to the office, she walked in and the first thing she said was, "I'm resigning." And I'm like, "Thank God."
Oh, no.
I didn't say it that way. I said, "Oh, well, that's terrible." But it was a real relief because that was one less thing that I had to worry about. And the second thing that happened after that was I got the board together. And at that time, we also had a very significant customer, Main Freight, and a chap called Kevin Drinkwater was the CIO. Kevin, as a legend. Time, and he was pretty influential, obviously, because he was a big customer. So I got him and the board together, and I said, "No, I've just been doing this wrong, and I'm sorry that your advice has been well-intentioned, but it isn't, for whatever reason, it's not working for me. I need to figure out a way to do this myself, and I need your support in doing that." And to their credit, they were 100% supportive of that, and they said, "Fine, whatever it is you need." And so I then, rather than trying to make other people's ideas work, I was pretty much in the seat of, right, I've got the mandate now, it's time to step up and do it. So we ended up tuning the business to being much more profitable essentially by not adopting a growth mentality, which was an ironic situation, because it became clear that that's what we've been trying to do.
Yeah.
And it wasn't working, but instead of acknowledging that it wasn't working and doing something else, we kind of kept on going in that direction. So, and then of course, as you know, once you kind of start to get a cash neutral position and start making a modest profit, you've got a beachhead that you can build from.
Yeah.
So then it was, after that, it was kind of, just about keeping on going on a steady track, one foot after the other. So I don't know that I did anything kind of super miraculous other than that. It was just, just focusing on making sure that things were working properly, and that I wasn't in the situation of having to tell customers that things were fine when they weren't, and trying to avoid situations like that.
Yeah.
And that, I think, I got some good people around us, and we attracted some more good people to the cause. It became easier after the GFC, of course. People were less choosy about where they worked. We managed to attract a really good team over those years, and just kind of grew steadily. And we grew a combination of increasing business with existing customers and modestly extending that. We did completely cloudify the organization. So you
were very early into that space.
Yeah, where we went to cloud on way before Office 365. The precursor of Office 365 on Microsoft was called BPOS, and we adopted that before they rebranded it into Office 365. And I made the goal of having no technology that we were dependent on in the server rooms, and making the office paperless. So we got rid of all the paper, and they were good incremental steps, in the sense that the reason one of the things that really drove us to the cloud was we all turned up at work one morning to find the fire service outside, let us in the building. It turned out there was a massive bus bar that fed power into the building that had become red hot and failed, and they thought the spare part would take 3 months to get there. So we were facing 3 months of not being able to operate in our building.
Oh, wow.
Or even turn our servers on, which...
And you're on-prem back in those days, of course.
Totally on-prem. So it was a bit of a wake-up call.
I'm hearing you say a few things now that you're reflecting upon it. And the first one is probably the most important. And it's actually quite a courageous move because as entrepreneurs, as owners of companies, we can get trapped in this cycle of growth for growth's sakes. And growth is typically expensive. Only when you have a super effective flywheel, or you've nailed the timing, or you've got something which is, well, there's a timing link coming out into the world at a moment when everyone just needs that thing, then you have to kind of fund that growth, and it will take a proportion of your profit off the table, maybe all of it. Maybe you'll go into a loss situation, you have to keep on funding that thing over a period of time. And so having the kind of courage to step back and say, we don't need to do this for the sake of doing this. Let's generate some profit instead. That's the first thing. Second thing that you said is that getting the right people on the bus, classic Jim Collinsism, but we're a services company. We're selling humans. We're selling time from humans. Mm-hmm. And the quality of those people that surround us is going to dictate the quality of the result, and also the ability for us to continue getting more work from those customers that we've got. And the last thing is adopting some leading edge technology and then being proponents of that technology, putting aside the circumstance that you got there through. I want to tell a story about Kevin Drinkwater, actually. So this is a good story, and it demonstrates his character, but also the Mainfreight business as well. 2017, I'd started Ambit, and as the founder of a company, I had a team of engineers that were there and a support person that was there. But essentially, you are the person that does everything that nobody else can do or nobody else wants to do. And so that meant CRO, which meant salesperson at that point in time as well. And so I don't mind doing it. I have a bit of a skill at doing it. And so I was literally prospecting companies for about 6 months or so. I was the first one to prove, I had to go out into the market to prove that people wanted this thing that we had. And so one of my techniques is to get the company landline and call it at 5:15 p.m. because the receptionist probably isn't going to be there. In a company like Mainfreight, you can imagine someone's going to have to answer that phone. So I knew who the CIO was, Kevin Drinkwater. I cold called and 2 rings, and it was, hello Mainfreight, Kevin speaking. And I'm like, can I speak to Kevin Drinkwater, please? And he goes, this is he. And I said, I introduced myself, and I said, Kevin, I didn't realize I had your direct dial number. And he said, this is the company landline. We have a policy that the phone is answered within 3 rings, whomever may be there to answer that call. I was just flabbergasted about that story. Phenomenal business. They became a pilot customer of ours really early on in the days of Ambit and supported us for 4 or 5 years or so. Remarkable business, remarkable man.
Mm.
Yeah.
I agree. And I'm not sure if there's actually a connection. I think there may be, but Mainfreight is very similar in its many of its forms to Fisher & Paykel, but there was when I worked there. When it was one big organization, included all of the healthcare and appliances in one big organization. But they had that rule as well, except I think it was 4 rings, not 3. Right. But that was the rule. If the phone was ringing, that was potentially a customer, and it wasn't all allowed to keep ringing. Yeah.
It's, they say, get the little things right and the big things will kind of sort themselves in. And that speaks so much about culture, about taking ownership and taking action for things, about egalitarian, which is a fancy word for we're all equal, you know what it means, but we're all equal across the organisation. And so no matter who you are, if you're the CIO, sit on the executive team, report to the CEO, you're going to pick up that phone. And I'd imagine, I forget the name of the CEO founder, but Bruce is in it. Mm. Yeah, yes. May well have answered the phone from time to time as well, just to prove this. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. So 2019 was the ultimate exit date, but at what stage preceding that did either you as a team go, maybe it's time to sell, or people start expressing interest in buying the business?
So I think, there's always a lot of M&A activity going on. I think probably most organizations will get calls from time to time, people looking to offer amazing things. That was how the MailMarshall sale happened, as I understand it. They weren't looking; they just got a call out of the blue, and they said, here's a number, and they're like, cool. What do you want for that? And they said, okay, we want all this. Okay, that's fine. Well, and they just kept on saying, well, can we have this and this and this? And they just kept on saying, yes. This is the story there. It was that different time, right? Everyone was looking to acquire organizations of that nature, but so that M&A activity never kind of entirely goes away. We'd had calls from time to time, people showing interest, and we never really responded that well to it because we felt, there was didn't sound like it was real, or it was sounded too good to be true, or if it was going to be the case, it was probably kind of an asset stripping kind of approach that we probably weren't that keen on. Because I think there was always a belief that we had something that was worth preserving and worth continuing with, and we had we took the responsibilities to our big customers like Mainfreight that we didn't want them to not be served by whatever happened next. So we tended to be a little bit unresponsive to those kinds of calls. But in the end, I got to the point after 10 or 12 years where I said, look, I think it's time for me to step back and somebody else to take it to the next level. And what does that look like? So, maybe it's an exit sale, maybe it's a new person coming in to take over from me and I take the chair role or whatever, but it needs to be, fresh blood, new approach. And so that was like, everyone kind of shrugged and said, sure, but, so what's next? What do we do now kind of thing? So I think that mindset shift happened probably a couple of years, maybe even 18 months prior to the actual sale. And then we were just kind of doing, again, bit of luck, I think. Rob Lee from Theta called me one day, and he was ringing up to apologize because I'd known Rob for years, back to when he was back working as chief executive for Oracle New Zealand. I think that's around.
That's right.
So I had known him when I was working back at the hospital, and always got on well. And we'd had the odd coffee from time to time. He was growing Theta, and I was growing design tech, and we sort of kept in touch. He rang me up and said, I owe you an apology. And I said, why? He said, because I've just discovered that we've poached one of your staff, and we don't do that without, some kind of engagement. So if one of your staff applies for a position at our place, we feel that, we've got a responsibility there. Not sure exactly how that works out in practice, but
no, it's very difficult.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult. But anyway, I said, no, I can say, well, thanks, Rob, but that's a nice thought. And as it turned out, I wasn't shedding a tear for the person that was going anyway. But he didn't know that. And to be fair to her, she was a very capable individual. So, I always take the opportunity, take the attitude that when people decide they want to leave, they decide they want to leave. I might be unhappy about that, but it's not changing anything. So I don't tend to get upset about those things. But he said, oh, well, we want to let you know, we respect your organisation and we wouldn't, poach your staff. And I said, no, I appreciate that. He said, by the way, have you ever thought about selling? And I said, of course, who hasn't? He said, would you like to have a coffee and have a chat? And I said, sure. So that was how it started, personal relationship. And so we had a couple of coffees. We actually had many coffees up on a little place on K Road, which is gone now, but was his favourite coffee haunt, just around the corner from Theta. And the more we explored the idea, the more I started to feel that there was an opportunity here to preserve the value of the organisation that we built, and that there was a values match in the acquisition, not just a monetary transaction. And for better or for worse, that was a factor for us all. So, and I think that it's probably fair to say that we probably could have got more for the business than if that hadn't been a factor for us. But I think that, for our people and for our customers and for our own sense of job well done, that was a factor that we wanted to take into consideration. And, you'd know more about this than me, but I think a lot of mergers and acquisitions do not achieve the expected business case for a lack of those kinds of things. So,
yeah, they say that 70% of acquisitions fail to realise the value that they set out to achieve in the first place, so they don't deliver the numbers. And it's difficult to kind of quantify in which part of the market that applies and, which numbers are the most important things, because you've got so many variables that people are trying to achieve. But what I do know for founders is that if they tend to chase the number, the almighty dollar, as being the most important thing, then they can often be quite disappointed later on about what that means, especially for a services company, to their customers and their staff, about the way that they're treated once they go into that business. The highest priced buyer often tends to not be the best person that's a fit for all of the stakeholders. That makes sense. So again, I respect that that's a decision that you guys made.
Yeah, so that conversation took probably the second half of 2018, and we agreed that the startup date for the merger, as we call it, was 1st of February 2019.
Okay,
that was when it happened.
It's quite quick. So you were turning over, you mentioned off camera, kind of 9 million or so.
Yeah, my memory's a bit hazy on it, but it's then in that region.
Yeah, okay. We'll round it up to 10 just for argument's sake. The number that they attributed to it, you also mentioned that there was a formula that they had. But what was the kind of multiple, the profit multiple that they applied to the business?
I honestly can't remember what it worked out in multiple terms, but it would have been somewhere in 3 to 5 range. So, and as you know, a services business doesn't have a lot of tangible assets other than its people and its customers. So that's a factor in those kinds of multiples. So it wasn't, it wasn't another Marshall sale for sure, but we were happy with it. We were comfortable with the number that they came up with. And one of the things that we baked into it was an earn-out, and they were willing to be much more generous on the earn-out than they were on the headline number. And I didn't realize it at the time, but of course, you know that most people don't make the earn-out. But as it turned out, we did succeed in getting the earn-out as well.
Because we went into COVID, and of course, spending went rampant. So I had Simon Thurlow, who you know, Perislow. So slightly different time, but actually not a million miles apart. And he had a similar experience in that they forexed their number on the earn-out because they became part of this bigger organization and they had access to all these customers, and Simon leaned right into it, and that meant that there was a much greater return at the back end than what they anticipated. So it became a remarkable exit for them. What did it mean for you personally from the number, and not the actual number, but the multiple of the number that you invested in the company to buy that 51%? What did that mean for you from that point in time until the exit date?
That, for me personally, that was between 5 and 6.
5 and 6, yeah, okay. That's a good return. I presume you would have been paid a market salary along the way as well, and so...
Yeah. I earned a decent income out of it for all that time.
Yeah, okay. That's a great outcome. Did you stick around in theatre during that, for beyond that date of that?
I did. As it turned out, obviously there was an integration piece, so I took the role of transition manager to kind of make it go and bring all of the pieces together over a period of about 6 months. And that was full-time for that 6 months up until I was out July. And then I said to Rob, I'm just kind of happy to just tool around for a bit. I'll do a bit of consulting work if it's available, but I'm not kind of that bothered about it. And so there was bits and pieces of stuff that I could do, which they paid me a decent contractor fee for. And then my wife and I decided that we were going to head off to Europe for 2 months. So we did this massive big road trip around Europe.
2019. So yeah, wonderful timing. Yeah.
Perfect timing. And I remember coming back, I think it was probably in early November, mid-November, and waking up the next morning and realizing that I had exactly nothing to worry about. Even when we've been away, there was always like, what are we doing next? What's the plan? Because we weren't following a tour or anything. We were just like, we'll wake up, or we're going to go to St. Moritz tomorrow, whatever. But I was always the one who was thinking, right, where's the Airbnb? Where are we going to drive? I was planning and thinking all the way. And then I got back and it was like nothing. And it was the most blissful feeling, I have to say, for about 5 minutes.
Yeah. So how long did that last for? How long did that turn into? Because my experience and many others has been that turns into like an existential angst and like a void. So what was your experience, and how long?
It wasn't as bad as that, because I'm at heart I'm a lazy bugger, so I actually quite liked a little bit of leisure, and I had a bit of work to keep me interested in that. There was various other things, personal projects that I was doing that were absorbing. So I wasn't in kind of the traditional thing as I need to work to self-actualize. That wasn't for me at all. And in fact, the small amount of work that I was doing professionally, mostly through theatre at that time, was almost becoming a bit of an irritant because it was thrust at me, and I didn't really have the same agency over it that I'd had previously. And that was, no disrespect to anybody involved, because they're all great people, and I really enjoyed working with them, but it just wasn't for me. It wasn't working for me personally. And so I said that, I'm going to, that might have been after COVID, I'm struggling to remember now, but it was fine for up until COVID times, and then COVID hit and everybody was like, insane, everything was insane. At that point, just prior to that, I'd almost inked a deal on buying a new business. I had a deal on paper from a broker.
Type of business was it?
It was a digital business, but it was more, probably more digital marketing than kind of general purpose stuff that we used to do at Designer Tech. But it was small and it was potential, and it was a good little business, and it would have been a great deal actually, but he pulled out on it in the end. He decided not to sell. And it was the right call because, as you say, everything went ballistic. I don't know whether he saw that coming or not, but anyway, he changed his mind. So I was left twisting in that particular wind. But then, while we were in really quite a luxurious position by comparison to most people, because we had this nice big townhouse in the centre of town, we didn't have to worry too much about toilet paper or whatever it was that people were worrying about. We had supplies.
Toilet paper and flour.
Yeah. But we had money, and we didn't have a business that we needed to look after anymore, and so we were in a very privileged position, really. So we spent a lot of time kind of drinking wine and listening to the authorities tell us what to do. But what I noticed in all of that was the impact that it was having on digital, and I thought, wow, it's interesting, isn't it? Because for a long time, all of the unfortunate IT guys that had been kept in the basement and referred to as the sweaty T-shirt brigade are now, the heroes of the hour, because they're deploying laptops and making people go and teaching them how to use Zoom and all of those cool things. So in a way, I kind of felt, oh, I missed out. I mean, that would have been kind of fun in a way to be deeply embroiled in. But equally, I could see how there's a real opportunity here, because they for the smaller businesses, they don't really know how to do that particularly well. So that led us into the idea of establishing the new business, the CIO Studio, which is focused on helping people to make good decisions about how they deploy technology, so strategy and program delivery and so on, for mid-sized companies that don't have the wherewithal to have a full-time CIO, so a fractional pie essentially. And that was so that started to occupy my mind as to how we might construct this. So I spent the next year conceptualizing the whole way in which that business would operate, and that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of the lessons that you've carried across from buying into and then building a technology services company, what are the things that you've now gone, I am not going to do that now with the CIO Studio?
I guess that the big lesson that I've brought out of the Designer Tech and subsequently the merger is Rob Lee very fond of saying that Theta is not an exceptional company. We're just really, really good at selling. And he's right. They're very, I think he undersells it actually in that respect, because he's got some really great people, and he makes a virtue of recruiting the best people, and they do that very well. So they're not quite as unexceptional as they say they are. But in terms of what they do, there's lots of companies that do the same thing. Designer Tech was one of them. So they don't have a special differentiator. But what they do really well that other people do less well is sell. They can sell their stuff really well, and they can sell it at very good margin, and they govern the organization very well. So that was kind of I watched that and I realized that the whole dream that every techie that ever walked the earth has, that if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat the path to your door, is crap. If you sell the old mousetrap as better than anybody else is selling mousetraps, the world will beat a path to your door. That's actually how it works. So the ultimate thing is the ability to shift whatever it is you've got to sell, and make money out of sell it. So, as you know, the easiest thing in the world is to sell your stuff at a loss.
Yep.
And so, and it's so fundamental and so straightforward, but still, I think, is underappreciated. I've lost count of the number of, as you know, worked a lot in the health sector over the years, number of doctors that, these guys are earning good coin. They're not underpaid. They work hard. But they all want to create a software product. They think it's easy, right? Just write some code.
Yeah.
How hard can it be?
Yeah.
I'm like, sure, you go for it. And some of them do it, to be fair. But, we always tend to, before we become entrepreneurs and we know how it works, we always tend to go, it's easy. I know these guys, look, Mark Zuckerberg, what he's done, I could do that. I'm as smart as Mark Zuckerberg. Well, no, you're freaking not.
No, sure you would have been there already.
Oh, you would have done it, right? And that was, Sean was fond of saying this. Sean he's a modest man, but he's very smart. A couple of things that I've always taken from him. One was he used to say, anybody who's any good doesn't work for somebody else. And you know that they're not that good because they work for somebody else. And I think that's a little harsh in some ways, but it's also true.
Yeah.
If people are brilliant at whatever it is that they do, they can make money for themselves much better than they could. And I guess I'm living proof, because I don't think I'm an exceptional person, but I was prepared to take that risk. It's that most people are just not prepared to take that risk. And so I don't mean to imply that they're incapable, but they're just missing that piece.
Yeah.
And the other thing that Sean used to say, that there's a different space, but I've always paid attention to it, is that let's not try and figure out how we're going to do something until we are absolutely clear about what it is we're going to do.
Yeah.
And I've taken that to just about every customer meeting at CIO Studio since, because people ring us up and say, we need to buy this product. And I'm like, do you know? There must be something that makes you say that. And, we need a CRM because we need to sell them. Okay, perfect. Now we're starting to get closer to the reason.
Yes.
Still not convinced that you need a CRM, but, that you're wanting to sell more. And it's quite hard.
Yeah.
We're just about to kick off a whole campaign based around lean thinking. And lean thinking, they talk about the 5 whys. Until you've asked the why question 5 times, you're not getting anywhere close to the root.
No.
And those are some of the learnings.
Yeah. A manifestation of that in today's world over the last couple of years is the number of enterprise, to a certain extent, medium-sized business, certainly as well, that have headed down the path of doing an AI. We must do AI. We must be in AI. And McKinsey famously came out with that report in about September of last year, August, September of last year. And it was that 95% of enterprises that had gone down the path of implementing AI had failed to realize the benefit that they sought to achieve from it in the first place. And then you read the report and you talk to people and you put the brain that, we've got around, technology deployments. And I'm like, they didn't know what they were trying to achieve in the first place. They had no clarity on either A, what their processes were, B, what the core problem inside those processes could have been, or C, what the hypothesis is that they were trying to fix in the first place. And so therefore they had no real clarity on what that path was going to look like, nor how they were going to realize the benefits. So I understand why you're doing it.
The other thing that AI has shown us is that when we think we're being really erudite and wise in verbal conversation. We're almost completely incoherent, and you see it in black and white. So we're actually very, very poor at instructing even each other, never mind
a machine. Yeah. So, Ray, there's an alternate Ray in an alternate universe, and he's deeply satisfied by the career that he's had, and it hasn't been to be the quite varied career that you've had of programmer, leader of technology, buying into a business and owning a business and being an entrepreneur. So quite a varied career, really doing that. But it's a different career. But he's deeply satisfied by that career. What is that career?
In the alternate Ray?
The alternate Ray.
I think I should have been a carpenter, actually.
Do you whittle?
No, not at all. And I can't drive a nail straight. But I think I probably, if I'd applied myself at a younger age, I probably could have learned how to do those things properly, and I might have found it a lot more satisfying. When I was in the white heat of the terrible project at Fisher & Paykel, I got a lot of solace from building my own home, or not building it, but doing, landscaping and various kind of building activities around the house. I think it was the first time in my career where I actually enjoyed being at home on the weekend, because I was doing interesting creative stuff. So I'm not bad with my hands, and I think I could possibly have explored a completely different career.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I look at people that have those skills with a little bit of envy, because, as a knowledge worker, you kind of don't necessarily see the output of your work. It's based upon feedback. And so, people that get the ability to go, I'm going to build a deck, or I'm going to build a house, or whatever it might be, and then, work through that process and solve the problems and then construct that thing, looks to be deeply satisfying. So I understand that. Yes. Yeah. Ray, very grateful for your time and coming on the show and sharing your story and journey today. Ray Delany on LinkedIn, if anyone wants to find you, CIO Studio. And you've also got a podcast, and you're out there singing a good song about enabling mid-sized businesses how to realize benefit and value from their technology. So if that's something that's of interest to you, then look Ray up. So I appreciate your time today, Ray. Good to catch up.
It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, and if you've gotten this far, you definitely have, then I reckon you should go and check out a copy of my book. It's available on my website or Amazon.com. There's an Audible version as well. And it's a blend of personal insight and experience on what it takes to build and sell a company. It's not a how-to guide. You can go to ChatGPT for that. I've had some wonderful unsolicited feedback from people, but I did ask some folk for it. And here is one of the bits of feedback that has come from one of the early readers. Josh has created something rare, a guide that's both deeply practical and genuinely wise. His writing is punchy, clear, and feels like sitting across the table from someone who's been through it all and knows exactly what you need to hear. This is the resource every founder needs when facing the biggest decision of their professional life. Honest, actionable, and completely grounded in reality. That's from Susie McAlpine, who is herself a best-selling author and a speaker and business advisor. Please go check out a copy available on the website. Thanks for listening.